The power had been out for 3 hours when I heard the motorcycles rumbling down Maple Street. From my kitchen window, I watched a convoy of leather-clad riders slow to a crawl, their headlights cutting through the October darkness like searchlights. My neighbors' houses sat silent and black, emergency candles flickering behind drawn curtains. At 72, I'd lived through enough storms to know this wasn't weather-related. The grid had failed again, just like it did last summer. I was spooning cold soup from a can when the knock came. 3 firm raps on my front door, confident but not aggressive. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the flashlight, my arthritis reminding me that I wasn't as steady as I used to be. Through the peephole, I could make out a tall figure in a black leather jacket, silver hair catching the moonlight. Margaret? Margaret Chin? The voice was deeper than I remembered, weathered by decades, but unmistakably familiar. My breath caught in my throat. Danny? Yeah, it's me, Daniel Morrison. From the church social last month, we had coffee afterward. I fumbled with the chain lock, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Danny Morrison, the retired mechanic who'd ask me out after we'd both attended the grief counseling group at St. Matthew's. He'd lost his wife 2 years ago. I'd lost Robert 3. Our coffee date had been pleasant enough, 2 lonely people sharing stories over lukewarm coffee and stale Danish. But I hadn't expected to see him again, certainly not like this. When I opened the door, he stood there with that same shy smile I remembered, but something was different. Behind him, I could see the silhouettes of other motorcycles, maybe 6 or 7, their riders still mounted and waiting. The machines gleamed even in the darkness, well-maintained, expensive-looking bikes that spoke of pride and purpose. "I'm sorry to bother you," Danny said, removing a worn leather cap. His hair was completely silver now, I realized, though he'd worn a baseball cap during our coffee date. The power's out all over the county, and we're trying to get back to the clubhouse, but the main roads are blocked, trees down from the storm yesterday. I remembered you lived on Maple Street, and I was hoping— He paused, glancing back at his companions. "Would it be possible for us to wait it out in your yard, just until morning? We've got sleeping bags, won't be any trouble." I should have been afraid. 7 strangers, bikers no less, asking to camp on my property in the middle of a blackout. But something in Danny's eyes, the same gentleness I'd seen when he talked about his late wife Mary, made me hesitate. During our coffee date, he'd shown me pictures of his grandchildren, talked about the community garden he tended at the senior center. This was the same man. "Are those your friends?" I asked, nodding toward the motorcycles. Danny chuckled, and the sound was warm in the cold air. "The Sunset Riders. We're not exactly the Hells Angels, Margaret. Most of us are retired, just guys who love to ride. We volunteer at the VA hospital, do charity runs for the Children's Hospital. Tonight, we were coming back from a fundraiser in Riverside." I studied the group more closely. In the reflected light of their headlamps, I could see gray beards, weathered faces, men who looked like they could be sitting in the church pew beside me on Sunday mornings. One of them waved when he noticed me looking. "I suppose the backyard would be all right," I heard myself saying. "You can access it through the side gate. There's a spigot for water if you need it." The relief on Danny's face was immediate and genuine. "Thank you, Margaret. Really. We'll be quiet, gone first thing in the morning." I watched through my bedroom window as they filed through the gate, pushing their motorcycles rather than riding them, showing consideration for my sleeping neighbors. They moved with the practiced efficiency of men who'd camped together many times before, setting up a neat circle of sleeping bags near my apple tree. Someone produced a small camping stove, and soon I could smell coffee brewing. Unable to sleep, I found myself in the kitchen again, peering through the curtains. Danny sat apart from the group, staring up at the stars. On impulse, I grabbed my heaviest robe and slipped outside. "Can't sleep either?" I asked softly, settling onto my porch steps. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't want to wake you, just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange life is. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be camping in the backyard of a woman I barely know, asking for help, He shrugged. Mary used to say I was too proud for my own good. Wouldn't ask for directions, wouldn't ask for help fixing things around the house. And now? Now I'm learning that pride is a luxury I can't afford anymore. None of us can, really. We take care of each other because that's all we've got left. I wrapped my robe tighter around my shoulders. How long have you been riding with them? About a year. Started after Mary passed. I bought the bike on a whim, some crazy notion about freedom and the open road. Turned out I was terrible at being alone on the highway. Met these guys at a diner outside Sacramento. They took me in, taught me that riding isn't about running away from things. It's about finding a different way to be part of something. One of his friends approached, a stocky man with a gray ponytail. "Everything all right, Danny?" "Margaret, this is Curtis, our road captain. Curtis, meet Margaret, our gracious host." Curtis tipped an imaginary hat. "Thank you kindly for the hospitality, ma'am. We don't take kindness for granted." "Are you all retired?" I asked. "Mostly. I taught high school for 35 years. Danny there was the best motorcycle mechanic in 3 counties. Big Jim over there was a paramedic." "We got a retired cop, a mailman, even a librarian." Curtis grinned. "Not exactly the outlaw biker image, are we?" I laughed, surprising myself. "I have to admit, you're not what I expected." We get that a lot. People see the leather and the bikes and think we're trouble, but most of us are grandpas who just happen to like the feel of wind in our faces. As Curtis returned to the group, Danny and I sat in comfortable silence. I found myself studying his profile in the dim light, remembering our awkward coffee date. He'd seemed nervous then, fumbling for conversation topics, both of us dancing around the obvious fact that we were 2 grieving people trying to figure out if we could be something other than alone. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For not calling after our coffee. I wanted to, but—" He ran a hand through his silver hair. "I panicked, I guess. It had been so long since I'd sat across from a woman who wasn't Mary. I didn't know how to navigate that." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I wondered, but I understood. This is all new territory for both of us. Is it? New territory, I mean? I considered the question. Robert had been gone 3 years, but the space he'd left in my bed, at my dinner table, in my daily routines still felt enormous. The idea of someone else filling even part of that space seemed both terrifying and necessary. "I think so," I said finally. "I think that's exactly what it is." We talked until the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. Danny told me about his adult children scattered across the country, how they worried about him riding at his age. I told him about my daughter Sarah, who called every Sunday from Portland to check on me, her voice tight with the peculiar anxiety adult children feel when their parents start showing signs of mortality. "She wants me to sell the house, move into one of those senior communities," I confided. "It's not safe for a woman my age to live alone in such a big place." "What do you want?" "I want to die in the bedroom where I said goodbye to my husband. I want to keep tending the garden we planted together. I want to make my own choices about what's safe and what's not." The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended. Danny nodded slowly. Mary and I had that conversation too. She wanted to stay home, even when the cancer got bad. Her sister thought we were being foolish, that we should have moved her to a facility with proper care. "Do you regret it, keeping her home?" "Never, not for a second." His voice was firm. "She died holding my hand in our own bed, with her cats purring beside her and her garden visible through the window. That was her choice, and I was honored to make it possible." The sky was lightening now, painting the world in soft grays and pale golds. Around us, the sunset riders were stirring, packing their gear with the quiet efficiency I'd noticed the night before. I realized I didn't want them to go. In the space of one evening, my quiet neighborhood had felt less lonely, more alive. "Margaret," Danny said, standing and stretching, "would you like to have breakfast somewhere? I mean, after we clear out and you've had a chance to—" "Yes," I said before he could finish. "I'd like that very much." As I watched them prepare to leave, wheeling their motorcycles back through the side gate, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not just for breakfast with Danny, but for whatever might come after. The Sunset Riders called their goodbyes, voices warm with genuine gratitude, and I found myself waving from my porch like I was seeing off old friends. Danny was the last to leave, pausing at my front gate with his helmet tucked under his arm. "Thank you," he said simply, "for taking us in, for trusting us. Thank you for reminding me that taking a chance on people can still surprise you." He smiled then, that same shy expression from our coffee date, but with something new behind it, confidence maybe, or hope. "I'll pick you up at 9? There's a diner on Route 7 that makes perfect pancakes." 9 sounds perfect. I watched him ride away, his motorcycle's engine a low, contented rumble in the morning air. Then I went inside to shower and choose what to wear for my second first date with Danny Morrison. By 8:30, I had changed clothes 3 times and rearranged my hair twice. The woman in the bathroom mirror looked nervous but alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. I'd settled on a blue sweater Robert used to say brought out my eyes, paired with comfortable jeans and the boots Sarah had given me last Christmas. Practical but stylish, she'd insisted. The power was still out, but the morning light streaming through my windows was enough to see by. I was spreading peanut butter on toast when I heard shouting from outside. Urgent voices, the sound of running feet. Through my kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from across the street, standing in her front yard, her hands pressed to her mouth in distress. I grabbed my jacket and hurried outside. A small crowd had gathered near the Patterson house, neighbors I recognized but rarely spoke to, all talking at once. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 80s who lived alone with 3 cats, was crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, approaching the group. "Someone broke into Edith's house during the night," explained Tom Reeves, the accountant from the corner house. "Cleaned out her jewelry box, took the cash she kept in her kitchen drawer, even stole her late husband's war medals from the mantel." My stomach dropped. Mrs. Patterson had always been kind to me, bringing me homemade cookies at Christmas, offering to collect my mail when I traveled to visit Sarah. The thought of someone violating her home, stealing her precious memories, made me feel sick. "Did anyone call the police?" I asked. "Phone lines are down with the power out," Tom said, "and cell service has been spotty since the storm. I tried driving to the station, but there's a tree blocking Oak Street, and Pine Avenue is flooded." Mrs. Patterson looked tiny and fragile in her flowered housecoat, her white hair uncombed, her eyes red with tears. "They took Harold's Purple Heart," she whispered. "He earned that at Normandy. It was all I had left of him." I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling how she trembled. At 85, she was one of the oldest residents on our street, and the violation of her space seemed to have shaken something fundamental in her sense of safety. "We should organize a neighborhood watch," suggested Janet Mills, the school teacher from 2 doors down, "until the power comes back and we can get proper police response." "With what?" Tom asked. "Half the street is elderly, and the other half works during the day. We can't exactly mount an effective patrol." That's when I heard the motorcycles returning. 7 Harleys rounded the corner in formation, moving slowly down Maple Street. Danny was in the lead, and I could see him taking in the scene, the gathered neighbors, Mrs. Patterson's obvious distress, the general air of anxiety that hung over our little cluster of houses. He pulled up to the curb and dismounted, his friends following suit. "Everything all right, Margaret?" he asked, approaching our group with concern clear in his voice. I quickly explained about the break-in, watching his expression grow more serious with each detail. When I mentioned the stolen war medals, his jaw tightened, and I saw several of his companions exchange glances. "Ma'am," Danny said, addressing Mrs. Patterson directly, "I'm Danny Morrison. I'm very sorry this happened to you. No one should have to feel unsafe in their own home." Mrs. Patterson looked up at him with watery eyes. "Thank you, dear. But I don't know what anyone can do now. They're gone, whoever they were." Curtis stepped forward, his gray ponytail catching the morning breeze. "With respect, ma'am, they might not be gone far. Opportunistic thieves usually work a neighborhood systematically, especially during power outages when security systems are down. They're probably planning to hit more houses." "How do you know that?" Janet asked, and I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "I was a cop for 28 years before I retired," Curtis replied mildly. "Worked plenty of cases like this. They'll likely come back tonight, hit 2 or 3 more houses while everyone's still without power." Danny turned to me, then addressed the group. "Would you folks be opposed to us sticking around for a day or two, just until the power comes back and you can get proper police response? We could keep an eye on things, make sure no one else gets victimized." I could see the neighbors exchanging uncertain glances. 7 bikers offering to provide security for an entire street? It wasn't exactly conventional, but something about the way they'd handled themselves the night before, the quiet respect they'd shown, made me speak up. "They helped me last night," I said, looking around at my neighbors. "They were perfect gentlemen, and if Curtis is right about these thieves coming back—" "I appreciate the offer," Tom said carefully, "but we don't really know you folks." Big Jim, the retired paramedic Curtis had mentioned the night before, spoke up. "That's fair, but here's what we can tell you. We're all veterans or retired first responders. We've got clean backgrounds and we're bonded for the volunteer work we do. Curtis can give you his former department's number to verify if you want." "Phone lines are down," Janet pointed out. "I've got a ham radio set up on my bike," said another rider, a lean man with a gray beard. "Name's Eddie. I was a communications tech in the Army. I can patch through to emergency services, get word to the police about the break-in, and request extra patrols once they're able to respond." Mrs. Patterson looked up at Danny with something that might have been hope. "You really think they might come back?" "I think Curtis is probably right, ma'am. These kinds of thieves, they work fast and they work patterns, but they're also cowards. They only target houses that look undefended. If they see we're here, they'll move on to easier prey." "What exactly are you proposing?" Tom asked. Danny gestured toward the bikes. "We set up a visible presence, park our motorcycles where they can be seen from the street, do regular patrols on foot, check on folks, make sure everyone's okay. We're not looking to play vigilante. If we see actual criminal activity, we call it in through Eddie's radio and let the professionals handle it." I found myself studying the faces of these 7 men, trying to reconcile them with every preconception I'd ever held about motorcycle gangs. They looked like what they claimed to be: grandfathers, retirees, men who'd spent their careers serving their communities in various ways. There was something steady about them, something that spoke of competence and reliability. "I think we should let them help," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Mrs. Patterson nodded immediately. "If they're willing, I'd be grateful. I don't think I could sleep tonight knowing those people might come back." One by one, the other neighbors agreed. Tom was the last holdout, but eventually he nodded too, though he still looked skeptical. "All right then," Danny said. "We'll set up camp in Margaret's backyard again if she doesn't mind. That puts us centrally located to keep an eye on the whole street. We'll do patrols every 2 hours, maintain radio contact with emergency services, and hopefully the power will be back soon." As the crowd began to disperse, Miss Patterson approached Danny and took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have no idea what this means to an old woman." Danny's voice was gentle when he replied, "Yes, ma'am, I do. My mother lived alone after my father passed. I know how frightening it can feel." I watched this exchange with something warm spreading in my chest. This was the same man who'd fumbled nervously through our coffee date, who'd admitted he didn't know how to navigate new relationships at our age. But here, faced with someone else's vulnerability, he was completely sure of himself. "What about breakfast?" I asked as the neighbors headed back to their houses. Danny smiled ruefully. "Rain check? This feels more important right now." "You're right, it does." I paused, then made a decision that surprised me. What if I make breakfast for everyone? I mean, if you're going to be protecting the neighborhood, the least I can do is feed you. "Margaret, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." And I did want to, I realized. I wanted to be useful, to contribute something meaningful to this unexpected community that had formed around Mrs. Patterson's crisis. Within an hour, my kitchen had become the unofficial headquarters of the Maple Street security operation. The Sunset Riders had parked their motorcycles strategically around the neighborhood, creating a visible deterrent, while Eddie worked to establish radio contact with the county sheriff's department. My gas stove still worked despite the power outage, and I found myself cooking the largest breakfast I'd prepared since Robert's funeral reception. Curtis turned out to be an excellent helper in the kitchen, admitting he'd done most of the cooking after his wife developed arthritis. Big Jim shared stories about his paramedic days while scrambling eggs, and Danny surprised me by revealing he made excellent coffee on the camp stove they'd brought. "This feels like Christmas morning when I was a kid," I told Danny as we watched his friends dig into plates of bacon, eggs, and toast. The house full of people, everyone with a purpose, that sense of family, even among strangers. Is that what this feels like to you? Family? I considered the question. Maybe not family exactly, but definitely like belonging to something larger than just me. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson in her front yard talking to another neighbor. She was still in her housecoat, but she was standing straighter now, moving with more purpose. The violation of her home hadn't been erased, but she no longer looked like a victim. She looked like someone who had allies. "Danny," I said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Last night you said you were learning that pride was a luxury you couldn't afford anymore. What did you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, watching his friends through the window as they organized patrol schedules and tested radio equipment. "I spent most of my adult life believing I had to handle everything myself, provide for my family, fix whatever broke, solve every problem. Mary used to joke that I'd rather spend 6 hours figuring something out on my own than spend 5 minutes asking someone who already knew how to do it. That sounds familiar. Robert was the same way. After Mary died, I kept trying to handle everything alone. The grief, the loneliness, all the practical stuff you have to deal with when you lose a spouse. I was drowning, but I was too proud to admit I needed help. The motorcycle was supposed to be my solution. If I couldn't handle being alone in the house, I'd just get on the bike and ride until I felt better. But it didn't work. For about 3 weeks, I thought it was working. I'd ride all day, sleep in motels, eat at diners, convince myself I was having some kind of great adventure. Then one morning, I woke up in a Holiday Inn in Fresno, and I couldn't remember why I'd driven there or what I was running toward. I realized I wasn't having an adventure at all. I was just running away from everything that mattered. I reached over and touched his hand. What changed? I met these guys, and I discovered that there's a difference between being alone and being independent. I'd been confusing the two my whole life. They taught me that asking for help isn't giving up your independence, it's how you maintain it. When we help Mrs. Patterson today, we're not taking away her independence. We're making it possible for her to keep living in her own home safely. And when I let you camp in my backyard last night, you reminded me that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them help you. I needed a place to stay, But you needed to feel useful, needed to be part of something. We helped each other. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the simple clarity of what he'd said, or maybe it was the realization that I'd been confusing independence and isolation too. Eddie appeared in the kitchen doorway, interrupting my thoughts. Got through to the sheriff's department. They've got reports of similar break-ins in 3 other neighborhoods hit by the power outage. They're stretched thin with emergency calls, but they're going to try to get a patrol car through once the roads are clear. In the meantime, they appreciate us keeping an eye on things. Any word on when the power might come back? I asked. Tomorrow morning at the earliest. Could be longer if they find more damage to the grid. That meant at least one more night of camping in my backyard, one more night of feeling like part of something larger than my usual quiet routines. I found myself hoping it might take a little longer to restore the power. By afternoon, the Sunset Riders had transformed our sleepy street into something that felt more like a small town than a suburban neighborhood. They'd established a visible but unobtrusive presence, with 1 or 2 bikes always parked where potential troublemakers could see them. Every 2 hours, pairs of riders would walk the length of the street, checking on residents and making sure everything looked normal. I spent most of the day moving between my kitchen and my front porch, serving coffee to anyone who wanted it, and gradually getting to know each of the 7 men who'd taken on the responsibility of protecting us. Big Jim turned out to be a widower like Danny, though his wife had died in a car accident 5 years ago. He lived alone in a small apartment and admitted the Sunset Riders were the closest thing to family he had left. "Don't get me wrong," he told me as we sat on my porch watching Curtis and Eddie walk their patrol route. "I've got kids and grandkids, but they've got their own lives, their own problems. The guys understand what it's like to wake up every morning and have to decide all over again that life's still worth living." Is that what you have to do? Decide every morning? Some mornings, yeah, especially right after Linda died. There were days when the only reason I got out of bed was because I knew the guys were expecting me for our morning ride. Couldn't let them down. I thought about my own mornings, the ritual of making coffee for one, eating toast standing at the kitchen counter, the peculiar silence of a house where no one expects you to account for your time. Do you think that ever goes away, the decision-making part? I don't know, but I've stopped worrying about it. Some days I wake up grateful to be alive, excited about what might happen. Other days I wake up because my alarm went off, and getting up is just what you do. Both kinds of days are okay. Danny joined us on the porch, carrying a mug of the excellent coffee he'd been producing all day on his camp stove. "How are you holding up, Margaret? This is a lot of activity for someone who's used to a quiet house." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I surprised myself by how much I meant it. I keep thinking about something you said this morning, about the difference between being alone and being independent. I think I've been alone for 3 years, but I convinced myself I was being independent. What's the difference for you?" I gestured toward the street, where I could see Mrs. Patterson talking to Janet Mills while they both watched Curtis check the locks on their garden sheds. Independent means I choose to live in my own house and take care of myself. Alone means I do all of that without any meaningful connection to the people around me. Today feels independent. Yesterday felt alone. Are you worried about what happens when we leave, when things go back to normal? The question I'd been avoiding all day. Of course they would leave eventually. The power would come back, the police would resume normal patrols, and the Sunset Riders would return to whatever their regular lives looked like. I'd go back to my quiet house and my private routines, and Maple Street would return to being a collection of individual houses rather than a community. "I suppose I'll figure that out when the time comes," I said, though the prospect felt daunting. Danny was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, we do this kind of thing fairly regularly. Not security details exactly, but community assistance. Storm cleanup, charity events, helping elderly folks with yard work they can't manage anymore. We're always looking for people who want to be involved, who understand that taking care of each other is what makes life worth living." "Are you asking me to join a motorcycle gang?" I asked, and Big Jim laughed so hard he nearly spit out his coffee. "Not exactly," Danny said, grinning, "though I bet you'd look great in leather." "No, I'm saying that what you're feeling today, this sense of purpose, of belonging, it doesn't have to be temporary. There are ways to make it part of your regular life." Before I could respond, Eddie came jogging up my front walk, his expression urgent. "We've got movement," he said quietly. Curtis spotted a van doing slow drives past the houses on Oak Street. Same pattern as this morning, checking for signs that people are home, looking for easy targets. Danny was on his feet immediately. "Same van that was here earlier?" "Hard to tell in the daylight, but it's the right size and color. White panel van, no windows in the back, temporary plates." "What's the plan?" Big Jim asked. "Nothing dramatic," Danny said, but I could see the change in his demeanor. The casual, friendly retiree replaced by someone with purpose and authority. "Eddie, get on the radio and let the sheriff know we've got suspicious activity. Big Jim, I want you visible on Maple Street. Work on your bike, make some noise, let them know this area is occupied. Curtis is already on Oak Street, so that's covered." "What about the rest of us?" I asked. Danny looked at me with surprise, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Margaret, you should probably stay inside. If these are the same people who robbed Mrs. Patterson, they could be dangerous." "This is my neighborhood too," I said, standing up. "I'm not hiding in my house while other people protect it." "She's right," Big Jim said. "And anyway, what's more natural than neighbors talking on a front porch? If that van comes down Maple Street and sees Margaret and Danny having a conversation, it looks normal. If they see Danny standing guard alone, it looks suspicious." Danny considered this, then nodded. "Okay, but if anything happens, anything at all, you get inside immediately." We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, the white van turned onto Maple Street, moving slowly past each house. I forced myself to keep talking to Danny about ordinary things: the weather, Mrs. Patterson's cats, whether my apple tree would need pruning this fall, while my heart hammered against my ribs. The van slowed as it passed Mrs. Patterson's house, and I could see the driver's window roll down slightly. But then the driver noticed Big Jim working on his Harley directly across the street, tools spread out on a tarp, the bike's radio playing classic rock. The van sped up slightly, continued to the end of the street, and turned around. As it passed us again, heading back toward Oak Street, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a young man, maybe 30, with stringy hair and nervous eyes. He looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for small-time criminal. "Got him," Eddie's voice crackled over the radio. "Sheriff's deputy is en route, ETA 10 minutes. Suspects are parked at the corner of Oak and Pine, appearing to case the Henderson house." "Copy that," Danny replied into his own radio. "All units maintain visual contact, but do not engage." I realized I was holding my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Part of me was terrified. These were real criminals, not some abstract threat. But another part of me felt more alive than I had in years. When had I last been part of something this important, this immediate? "Danny," I said quietly, "when you were married, did you and Mary ever have adventures together? Real adventures, not just vacations." He gave me a puzzled look. "A few times. Why?" "I'm 72 years old, and I don't think Robert and I ever had a real adventure. We had a good life, a safe life, but nothing that ever made my heart pound like this." "Are you saying you're enjoying this?" "I'm saying I feel useful, important, like what I do matters." I paused, watching Big Jim casually pack up his tools while keeping an eye on the street. "Is that terrible? To be excited about criminals in the neighborhood?" Danny's smile was understanding. "Not terrible at all, just human." The police cruiser arrived 15 minutes later, followed by 2 more patrol cars and an unmarked detective sedan. Through Eddie's radio, we learned that the van had indeed contained the thieves who'd robbed Mrs. Patterson, along with stolen goods from half a dozen other houses in the county. They'd been arrested without incident, apparently too surprised by the sudden appearance of law enforcement to put up any resistance. Mrs. Patterson's reaction when Curtis personally returned her husband's Purple Heart was worth everything we'd been through. She stood in her front yard, holding the medal in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face while neighbors gathered around to share in her relief and joy. "How did you know they'd have it with them?" I asked Curtis. "Thieves like that, they don't have fences set up for military medals or family jewelry. They grab whatever looks valuable and sort it out later. Chances were good they still had everything in the van." As the police cars drove away with their prisoners, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and deflation. The adventure was over, the crisis resolved, and normal life would resume. Except, what was normal life for me now? Could I really go back to my quiet house and my solitary routines after experiencing this sense of purpose and community? "Looks like you folks won't be needing security services anymore," Danny said, though he didn't sound particularly happy about it. "The power's still out," I pointed out, "and you're welcome to stay as long as you need to." "That's kind of you, but we should probably head back to the clubhouse tonight. We've got a charity ride planned for this weekend. Need to make sure everyone's bikes are ready." I felt my stomach drop, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Of course, you've done more than enough." Danny studied my face for a moment, then said, "Walk with me?" We strolled toward my backyard where the other Sunset Riders were beginning to pack their gear. The efficient camaraderie I'd observed the night before was in evidence again, everything organized and purposeful. "I need to ask you something," Danny said when we were out of earshot of the others, "and I want an honest answer." "All right." "Yesterday, when we first met at grief counseling, and then during our coffee date, did you feel anything? Any connection? Any possibility?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, I think so, but I was scared. Scared of what? Of everything. Of being disloyal to Robert's memory, of making a fool of myself, of discovering that I'm too old or too set in my ways to start something new. I took a deep breath. Of finding out that you might be everything I've been hoping for, and then losing you too. Danny nodded slowly. "Those are all good reasons to be scared. They're the same reasons I didn't call after our date." "And now?" "Now, I'm more scared of missing out on whatever this could be than I am of any of those other things." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Margaret, I know this is all happening fast and under strange circumstances, but I'd like to keep seeing you, not just for breakfast tomorrow morning, but regularly. I'd like to introduce you to my kids, show you the clubhouse, maybe even teach you to ride if you're interested." "You want to teach me to ride a motorcycle?" The idea should have been ridiculous. A 72-year-old woman learning to handle a machine that had always seemed dangerous and foreign to me. But as I said it, I realized it didn't feel ridiculous at all. It felt like possibility. "Only if you want to." "But Margaret, today I watched you handle a neighborhood crisis with more grace and courage than people half your age. I watched you open your home to strangers, feed a crowd of bikers, and stand your ground when things got scary. If you can do all that, I think you can handle anything." I looked around my backyard, where these 7 men were efficiently packing away the temporary community that had transformed my quiet life. Tomorrow they'd be gone, and I'd be back to my familiar routines. But something fundamental had shifted in me over the past 24 hours, something that couldn't be packed away with sleeping bags and camp stoves. "Danny, can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" After the last 2 days, I think my definition of crazy has expanded considerably. When I opened the door last night and saw you standing there with your motorcycle friends, asking for help, my first thought wasn't about safety or propriety or what the neighbors might think. My first thought was that I'd been waiting for something exactly like this to happen, even though I didn't know what this was. "What do you think this is?" I gestured toward the street where Mrs. Patterson was still talking to neighbors, where the community that had formed around a crisis was reluctant to disperse. Purpose, maybe, or belonging, the feeling that what I do matters to people other than just me. And now? Now I think maybe this is bigger than just the crisis. Maybe it's about building a different kind of life than the one I've been settling for. Danny reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His fingers were calloused from decades of working on motorcycles, warm and steady in a way that felt both familiar and completely new. "So is that a yes to the motorcycle lessons?" I laughed, surprising myself. "Let me start with yes to seeing you regularly. The motorcycle lessons? Well, see." "Fair enough." He squeezed my hand gently. "Though I should warn you, once you get involved with the Sunset Riders, it's hard to maintain a quiet life. We're always volunteering for something, always getting involved in situations that probably aren't our business." "Like camping in a stranger's backyard during a power outage?" "Exactly like that." Big Jim called out from across the yard, "Danny, we should get moving if we want to make it back before dark." I felt my chest tighten. "You could stay one more night. The power's still out." "I know, but I think we've done what we came to do here, and—" he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I think if I stay longer, it'll be harder to leave. And I need to leave, at least for tonight. I need to go back to my regular life and think about how to fit this, us, into it properly." I understood, though I didn't like it. We were both old enough to know that decisions made in the heat of crisis don't always survive in the cold light of ordinary days. "Will you call me?" "Tomorrow, and I'll pick you up for breakfast on Saturday, if that works for you." What if the power comes back and everything goes back to normal, and this all feels like some strange dream? Danny looked around at the scene, his friends loading their motorcycles, neighbors still lingering in small groups on the street, Mrs. Patterson holding her husband's medal like it was made of gold in starlight. "Margaret, do you see anything about this situation that looks normal to you?" He was right. Nothing about the last 2 days had been normal, and maybe that was exactly the point. The Sunset Riders left just as the sun was setting, their motorcycles rumbling to life in sequence like some kind of mechanical symphony. I stood on my front porch, waving goodbye to men who 24 hours ago had been complete strangers and who now felt like the most important people in my world. Mrs. Patterson joined me on the porch, still clutching her husband's Purple Heart. "Strange how things work out," she said, settling into Robert's old chair without asking permission. I realized it was the first time anyone had sat in that chair since he died. "What do you mean? Yesterday morning, I was just a foolish old woman who got robbed. Tonight, I'm part of something. We all are." She gestured toward the street, where several neighbors were still gathered in small groups, reluctant to let the day end. "When's the last time you saw this many people on Maple Street talking to each other?" She was right. In the 3 years since Robert's death, I'd exchanged pleasantries with my neighbors, but never really talked to them. I knew Tom Reeves was an accountant and Janet Mills taught 3rd grade, but I couldn't have told you their favorite foods or whether they were happy or lonely or what they dreamed about. "Do you think it will last?" I asked. "This sense of community? I don't know, but I think we have a choice about it. We can let everything go back to the way it was, or we can decide to keep talking to each other, keep looking out for each other." "And you want to keep it going?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, and for the first time since I've known her, she looked less like a fragile elderly woman and more like someone with plans and opinions. "Margaret, I'm 85 years old. I've lived through the Depression, World War II, the Cold War, and more changes than I can count. You know what I've learned? Community doesn't just happen. It gets built, one conversation at a time, one favor at a time, one crisis at a time. Is that what happened here? We built the beginning of one. Whether it survives depends on what we do tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over our street. Without streetlights, the stars were more visible than I'd seen them in years. I found myself thinking about Danny's question, what did I want my life to look like now? Mrs. Patterson, I said, would you like to have coffee tomorrow morning? I mean, assuming the power's still out and I'm still making coffee on the camp stove Danny left behind. I'd like that very much. And Margaret? Call me Edith. I think after today, we're past formalities. After Edith went home, I remained on my porch, reluctant to go inside to the familiar silence of my house. The camp stove Danny had left was still set up in my backyard, along with enough coffee and supplies to last several more days. He'd also left one of the radios tuned to the emergency frequency where Eddie had been coordinating with law enforcement. On impulse, I went inside and gathered blankets and pillows, then returned to the porch. If I was going to have one more night without power, I wanted to spend it under the stars, thinking about everything that had changed. It'd been lying there for maybe an hour when I heard footsteps on my front walk. My heart jumped. Had the thieves had accomplices? But then I heard Danny's voice calling my name softly. Margaret, are you all right? I saw you on the porch and wanted to make sure. I sat up, pulling the blankets around my shoulders. I'm fine. I just didn't want to go inside yet. What are you doing here? I thought you were going back to the clubhouse. He appeared at the bottom of my porch steps, looking uncertain. I got about 10 miles down the highway and realized I was making a mistake. What kind of mistake? The kind where you let pride and overthinking get in the way of something that might be important. He climbed the steps and stood next to my makeshift bed. Can I sit with you? I moved over, making room on the porch swing. Did you come back just to see me? I came back because I realized that going back to my regular life tonight was just another form of running away. For the past 2 days, I felt more like myself than I have since Mary died. More useful, more connected, more alive. And most of that had to do with you. Most of it? Okay, all of it. The community thing was wonderful. Helping your neighbors felt good. But watching you bloom over the past 48 hours, that was what made it special for me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I bloomed? Margaret, when you opened the door 2 nights ago, you looked like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. Today, dealing with the crisis, taking care of everyone, standing up to potential danger, you looked like someone who remembered how to breathe. I considered this. Had I been holding my breath? The metaphor felt accurate in ways I hadn't expected. I keep thinking about what happens next, I admitted. Tomorrow, the power will probably come back, and everyone will go back to their normal lives, and this will all feel like it happened to someone else. Does it have to? What do you mean? Danny was quiet for a moment, then said, what if instead of going back to normal, we decided to make this the new normal? What if we decided that feeling alive and useful and connected was how we wanted to live from now on? How would that work, practically speaking? I don't know all the details yet, but I know that the Sunset Riders have monthly community service projects that could use an organizer, someone good with people, someone who understands how to make strangers feel welcome. I know that your neighbors clearly look up to you and trust your judgment. I know that you and I have something worth exploring, even if we don't know exactly what it is yet. Are you proposing to me? I asked, half joking. God, no. We're nowhere near ready for that conversation. Danny laughed, then grew more serious. I'm proposing that we stop being so careful with our lives. I'm proposing that we take some risks, make some plans, maybe even create some adventures. What kind of adventures? I don't know. Maybe we organize regular neighborhood watch programs for elderly residents. Maybe we start a support group for widows and widowers who are trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe we take that motorcycle trip to the coast I've been talking about for 2 years, but never had anyone to share it with. I pulled the blankets tighter around us both, surprised by how natural it felt to share them with him. Danny, can I ask you something? Anything. When you were married to Mary, did you ever imagine what your life would be like without her? Never, not once. I think I believed that if I didn't think about it, it couldn't happen. I was the same way. Robert and I never talked about death, never planned for the possibility that one of us would be left alone. So when he died, I had no idea how to be a widow. I just kept living like I was still married, except half of my life was missing. And now? Now, I think maybe I've been grieving not just Robert, but the person I used to be when he was alive. The woman who was part of a couple, who had a built-in companion for everything, who never had to make decisions entirely on her own. Danny nodded. That makes sense. But these past 2 days, I haven't felt like I was missing half of myself. I felt like I was discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. Which parts? I thought about this carefully, wanting to get it right. The part that can make decisions quickly when they matter. The part that's willing to take risks for people I care about. The part that can turn a crisis into an opportunity for connection. I paused. The part that might be ready to fall in love again, even though that terrifies me. Danny was very still beside me. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I don't want to waste whatever time I have left being careful and lonely and safe. I'm saying that if you're serious about taking risks and creating adventures, I'd like to do it with you, even though we barely know each other. Especially because we barely know each other. At our age, how long does it take to know if something's worth pursuing? A month? 6 months? A year? I'd rather spend that time finding out than spend it wondering. Danny turned to face me, and in the starlight, I could see the same mixture of hope and uncertainty I was feeling. Margaret, I should probably warn you that my life is not particularly glamorous. I live in a small apartment above the motorcycle shop where I still work part-time. My kids think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis with the bike and the club. I've got arthritis in my hands and high blood pressure, and some mornings I feel every one of my 68 years. I live in a house that's too big for one person. My daughter thinks I should be in assisted living, and I sometimes cry for no reason while watching television commercials. I think we're evenly matched in the glamour department. So what are we proposing exactly? I think we're proposing to stop being so afraid of everything, to see what happens if we choose adventure over safety, connection over independence, possibility over certainty. Danny reached over and took my hand again, the gesture feeling both familiar and thrilling. In that case, Margaret Chen, would you like to be my partner in whatever comes next? Yes, I said without hesitation. Yes, I would. I woke the next morning to the sound of my refrigerator humming back to life. The power had returned sometime during the night, bringing with it the familiar background noise of modern life. Air conditioning units cycling on, television sets resuming their previous programs, the electronic beeping of appliances resetting their clocks. Danny was asleep beside me on the porch swing, our blankets tangled together, his arm around my shoulders in a way that should have felt presumptuous, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. We talked until nearly dawn about everything and nothing, our children, our careers, our fears about aging, our dreams for whatever time we had left. I studied his sleeping face, trying to reconcile this peaceful, vulnerable man with the leather-jacketed biker who knocked on my door 2 nights ago. Both versions were real, I realized. The question was, which one would survive the return of normal life? As if he sensed my scrutiny, Danny opened his eyes and smiled. Good morning. Did the world end while we were sleeping? The opposite, I think. The world started again. I gestured toward the house where every window now glowed with electric light. Power's back. So it is. He stretched carefully, working the kinks out of a 68-year-old back that had spent the night on a porch swing. Any regrets about last night? I considered the question seriously. In the clear light of morning, did our middle-of-the-night promises and plans still feel real? Did the idea of building a life with this man I barely knew still make sense? None, I said, and meant it. You? Only that I waited so long to come back last night. We were interrupted by the sound of someone clearing their throat at the bottom of the porch steps. Mrs. Patterson, Edith, stood there with a thermos and a covered plate, looking amused. "I brought coffee and muffins," she called out, "though I see you two managed to stay warm without my help." I felt myself blushing as I untangled myself from Danny's arms. "Edith, it's not what it looks like." "Margaret, honey, I'm 85 years old. It's exactly what it looks like, and it's about time." She climbed the steps and settled into Robert's chair again, making herself comfortable. The question is, what happens now? Danny sat up, running his hands through his silver hair. Good question. Margaret and I had a long talk last night about not being so careful with our lives, but we didn't get into many specifics. "Well, I have a specific suggestion," Edith said, opening the thermos and filling 3 mugs with coffee that smelled infinitely better than anything that had come out of the camp stove. The Neighborhood Association meets next Thursday evening. We haven't had a decent turnout in years, but after yesterday, I think people might be interested in actually talking to each other. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "I'm proposing that you two present a plan for regular community activities. Neighborhood watch, certainly, but also social events, maybe a tool library where people can share equipment, possibly even a community garden in that empty lot on Pine Street." Danny looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Think we're ready to become community organizers?" "I think we're ready to try," I said. "But Edith, why us? You know this neighborhood better than we do." "Because yesterday, I watched you turn 7 motorcycle-riding strangers into a security force and emergency response team in about 2 hours. And I watched you," she pointed at Danny, "take responsibility for an entire street full of people you'd never met before. If you can do that in a crisis, imagine what you could accomplish with some planning and community support." The idea was both exciting and terrifying. I'd spent 3 years carefully managing a quiet, predictable life. Now Edith was suggesting I take on responsibilities that would make me a visible, active part of my community. "What about the Sunset Riders?" I asked Danny. "Would they be interested in being part of something like this on a regular basis?" "Are you kidding? Most of these guys are bored out of their minds with retirement. The opportunity to be useful again, to be part of something that matters, they'd jump at it." "So we're really going to do this?" I asked. "Turn a 2-day crisis into a whole new way of living?" Edith smiled and raised her coffee mug in a toast to new beginnings at any age. Danny lifted his mug to taking chances on people who might surprise you. I raised my own mug, thinking about how much had changed since I'd heard those motorcycles rumbling down Maple Street 2 nights ago. To learning that it's never too late to discover who you really are. As we sat there drinking Edith's excellent coffee and making plans that would have seemed impossible a week ago, I realized that the woman who had opened her door to 7 strangers during a power outage was not the same woman who had been living quietly alone for 3 years. That woman had been waiting for permission, for safety, for someone else to make the first move. This woman, the one sharing a porch swing with a motorcycle-riding widower while planning community events with her 85-year-old neighbor, was done waiting. Through my kitchen window, I could see other neighbors starting their day, heading out to retrieve newspapers and check mailboxes. Some of them waved when they saw us, and I waved back. By tonight, they'd all know that Margaret Chen had spent the night on her porch swing with Danny Morrison, and by tomorrow, the whole street would be speculating about what it meant. For the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to giving them something to talk about. Danny reached over and took my hand, our fingers interlacing with an ease that suggested we'd been doing this for decades rather than hours. "So, partner," he said, "what's our first adventure going to be?" I looked around at the street where I'd lived quietly for 15 years, now seeing it not as a place to hide from life, but as a place to build something new. I thought about the Sunset Riders, who'd shown me that community could form around the most unlikely circumstances. I thought about Edith, who'd lost precious things but refused to let the loss define her possibilities. "I think," I said slowly, "our first adventure is going to be figuring out what happens when you stop being afraid of everything." Danny squeezed my hand. "That sounds like the best kind of adventure." As the sun climbed higher over Maple Street, warming away the last of the night's chill, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Robert's diagnosis: anticipation for the future. Not the careful, cautious hope that had sustained me through 3 years of widowhood, but genuine excitement about possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. At 72, I was finally ready to find out what came next.